Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. I think we're going to have a really interesting and somewhat different conversation today with my special guest, Canon Hickman, and we will introduce him a little bit, but I want to kind of explain this episode because it's a little bit outside of the norm of what we do on Space for Life. So if I were to think about this episode and how I might title it, what it might end up being titled is, I think about this as how to make money work for you versus working for money. And I'm not thinking so much about working for money as a factor of our careers, but that so many of us by nature, because money is so significant in our lives, end up giving all of our energy to money rather than money working for us and for our good and for our lives. And so we haven't really had many conversations on Space for Life about money other than about giving, which is one aspect of it. But I so recognize that amongst the people I meet, a large percentage of people that I know are either obsessed with money as the overall driving force of everything they think about. They're dominated in some senses by their thoughts about money or their worries about money. Or there's a group that are also completely intimidated and uncomfortable about anything and everything about money. They feel overwhelmed by it and very incapable about it. And so this episode is hopefully going to speak to any of us that are in any of those categories, because I've become convinced so much that money, too often, it depletes joy, it disrupts and damages relationships, and in doing all of that, it sabotages life for us. So many people that are doing so well in so many areas of their life are constantly having the knees knocked out from them because money is controlling so much within their lives. So what we're going to talk about today with Canon is a way and a framework for how can we get money to work for us rather than us always grinding and working for money in our lives. So Canon is going to be he's a perfect guest for this. I've known Canon for now probably 5, 6, 7 years, and our paths have crossed along a lot of different angles. Canon is one of the owners of Equity Concepts, a wealth management firm here in Richmond, Virginia. And we actually got to know each other. I attended a seminar of his on a particular aspect of wealth management. And through my friendship or relationship with him and one of the other, I guess, in a sense, former owners of Equity Concepts, also created the relationship where my son, Alex, works with Canon, and I invest, I'll admit it right on the front end with the Canon, but it's because he really knows what he's talking about. And so when I envisioned this episode to talk about creating a framework, a way of thinking in a healthy way, in a holistic way about money, and a way of helping people get over the hump, you were the first person that came to mind.
All right. I'll take it.
I appreciate everything that you've done in so many ways and respect so much of it. So, Ken, why don't you just take just a couple minutes just to tell people about yourself, and then we'll dive right into the content.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a life story that's, unique. Grew up around here, Mechanicsville, Virginia. Went to Atlee High School. For the longest part of my life, my whole life was baseball. So, I mean, every day practice, kind of like it is nowadays. Kids are just deep into sports, and I was deep into sports. So, grew up around the fields and, just being competitive and athletic and all that sort of good stuff. Ended up going to the University of Virginia, played baseball there. Was lucky enough, actually, if you guys, follow baseball, got to play with some really good baseball players, the likes of Ryan Zimmerman and Mark Reynolds, and actually around here, Justin Verlander on our AAU team, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And looking back, it's like, man, there were some pretty incredible talents. And also, if you're a UVA person, this guy, Brian O'Connor, who's now the coach of the UVA team, we were the first team that got to play under his guidance. So that was pretty cool. So got to see, the whole trajectory of the team.
And you were a pitcher, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they didn't make up my name either. It's actually on my birth certificate, So everybody asked me that. Yeah. Luckily it worked out from a, talent standpoint. But played baseball there and really dedicated a big part of my efforts and energy to, success in that space.
That's pretty big league baseball. I mean, other than the true big leagues, I mean, UVA baseball is a big deal.
Well, I can tell you, I had plans to play the big league baseball, and it was a real test of humility, coming back, from that. But it's so funny because, for talking about my life story, I wasn't drafted, and then I got, invited to tryouts and stuff like that, afterwards, And I just kind of decided I must not be good enough to play. And so I accepted my first job right out of college, down in North Carolina for a developer down there. And anyhow, the day that I had accepted the job, I got a call from my coach saying that, there was a spot for me, with the Blue Jays, right? The team.
Wow.
And so, on the minor league, just to try, just to give it a go. And I call my dad, right? Call my dad like, hey, what do I do? I've been working my whole life. He's like, well, statistically speaking, son. And then he gave me the whole, hey, you're probably better off, getting your career started than trying to chase down this rabbit hole. And it turns out that was, a hard pill to swallow, but the best advice that I possibly could have gotten at the time because looking back, I really, I had a great career, I had a great experience, but it was time for me to, to jump off into something else. And so anyhow, after a short stint of making cold calls and, that sort of stuff for a developer, I'm like, how am I using, what I've learned? And so I was an econ graduate. And so, really trying to put my skills into practice. And throughout my whole life, my dad has, to his credit, really been trying to train me from a financials. Now, he was into real estate, which is kind of why I ended up going that direction.
Right.
But it was never about real estate. It was about, financial disciplines and financial success. Like he didn't graduate from college. He, started building houses, framing and that sort of thing, was able to kind of change his trajectory. So he was very focused on teaching us how to kind of find financial success in that space. And so for me, it's like, how am I going to do that? How am I going to be able to use the skills that I had learned? And I got connected to, the original founders of Equity Concepts and just sort of decided to take a leap of faith and jump into, the financial services world.
Which was how many years ago?
That was 2006.
2006.
Yeah.
18 years. That's solid. Yeah. Well, it's neat to hear all of that because I wasn't, familiar with all of that kind of background. And it's a perfect kind of segue to what I think is a good place to start this conversation. And it's a conversation about money. That is, I think so many people have a hard time talking about money. So you had the experience, and we even talked about it a little bit before the podcast, about the impact that your dad has had on you with training in financial matters, but then also being an ear for wisdom when it comes to some of the really important decisions in life. And I had similar experience, not exactly the same, because my dad was very wise when it came financially, but he didn't talk about it much at all. But there were a couple of critical times in early-ish adult years where I had what I felt like was a really complex decision to make that was around finances. And I went to him, and that wisdom kind of came to the surface, and he really led me in an important direction. And so I think one of the byproducts that I would hope might come from our conversation is that we elevate money wherever we are with it to be something that we can talk about with a little bit more ease, even if we talking about that we don't handle it well, or that it makes us worried, or that we're anxious, but that we can begin to have conversations, particularly with the critical people in our lives, our spouses, our kids, our closest friends, that we could begin to talk about this, because the more we kind of keep it under wraps, the larger it grows and the more problematic. And there's no need. It doesn't help us in our lives.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, there's a stigma around talking about money, and I think that there's a difference between, people that have reached financial success and that are boisterous over their success and talking about, just the disciplines of success. And, unfortunately, it's not really taught in school. So just the practicalities, people have to learn it on their own. And because it's sort of a generational thing. I mean, I have been blessed for sure, without a doubt, that I had somebody in my life, my dad, who at a very early age was very transparent about finances and trying to teach us the principles of, how to do what you're supposed to do with money. And, talking about, being your own person and going against the grain, all things that, are important if you want to succeed. But there's definitely a stigma, and you have to be comfortable going against the grain from that standpoint and talking to if you're the first one, right? If you're the first one who's willing to do that, be the first one and talk with your kids, and teach them, the financial disciplines, and talk to your parents, if they haven't talked to you. So the opportunity is now. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and you can change the trajectory of those closest to you by being the person who's willing to break through that stigma.
For sure.
So I think it's a huge thing. It might be the most important thing we talk about on this, is to have the courage to step up, whether it's stepping up and admitting that this is a struggle point for you, whether it's stepping up and leading those, whatever it is, but just talk about it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's great. And so helpful that you had that type of experience and model from your dad.
There's no doubt the blessings and curses are generational. They last.
Yes, but they can be broken.
That's right.
Yes, both are true. Yeah. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to tackle now, I think, what is complicated on the surface, but we're going to try to really simplify, talking about a framework for handling money in our lives. And what I'm convinced of is that the kind of framework that we've kind of talked about a little bit before this is important and helpful regardless of where someone is on this journey. Whether someone is really dirt poor at this point or just getting started, whether they're in the middle of kind of the throes of family and managing, this tight thing that never seems to be enough, or whether people are really finding a lot of success. This framework is important for making this transition of working for money versus money working for you. So anyway, I'd love to kind of just get your thoughts about how would you begin to think about a framework. And we'll try to put some of these steps, if you want to call it, in the show notes. But
Sure.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. If you're trying to break it down into, what are the most critical steps to financial success, I definitely think it's a journey in trying to break it down into pieces. Maybe once you figure one piece out, then you go to the next piece and you go to the next piece. Maybe it doesn't all happen at once. But it's interesting because, a lot of people think about investing and they immediately go into the savings, right? And, what fund, that sort of stuff. But the reality is the most important investment you can make is in yourself, right? Investing in yourself, in your own success, in your career, because, obviously if you are earning more money, it will allow you greater opportunities to be able to save, right? And so you can't skip over, just trying to really spend good, talk about this maybe a little bit later on, just the energy, spending energy into what you want to get the greatest outcomes on, right?
Yeah.
So I think the first step for sure is just trying to remind people to, invest in themselves.
So what does investing in yourself look like? I mean, it's something more than just choosing a direction that's going to maximize income for you. What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about finances, I mean, if we're thinking about, savings and investments and income and, that sort of stuff, then, I mean, really the first step is if you're heading into a career, trying to picture maybe the person or group that's at the end of that career. Like, what does success look like in that space? Right?
At the end, which I love. It's like Stephen Covey's begin with the end in mind.
That's exactly right. Beginning with the end in mind, because if you find out, it's like, man, that person, their life is not that good, right? I just happened into this career, I happened into this opportunity, and it's not really truly your skill set, or it's not really truly the trajectory that you want to end at. Then, to me, that's probably the most important piece, is just make sure that you're on the path that you want to be on.
Well, and I think a piece of that in my mind is as you visualize that end and even the pathway towards it, is the lifestyle that is created if you were to take this path. Maybe it's a lifestyle that would produce a lot of income, but it would do it at the expense of actually having a good lifestyle. So envisioning, what's going to feed you, what's going to, bring life to you, as well as also create an income path that is in sync with your values.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were talking about this before the podcast, because the reality is that, we're always talking about the end, right? But your life is the process, right? Your life is the journey that you're on along the way to the end, right? And you kind of got to figure out what end you're talking about, but trying to figure out what that path is. Are you going to enjoy the journey that you're on? For sure. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. And that takes, that's a great place to, enter in with someone to have those kinds of discussions. Certainly your family, but maybe some others to really discern what is that path and what does investing in yourself. So there's an initial point of investing in the thought to make the right choice of where you want to go. And then there's also the investing once you've said, okay, I'm interested in being a doctor, or I'm interested in being a lawyer, or I'm just interested in getting involved in real estate or a restaurant, whatever. There's the investing in who you are towards that path.
Yeah, for sure. And what's interesting about that is that there's a whole mental approach to, I mean, probably just life in general, right? It's not just investing, but in life in general. And I think, if we're going to get a little philosophical here, just practicing contentment, we're trying to improve ourselves. We're trying to improve our trajectory. We're trying to improve our potential, all that stuff. But there's a practice of contentment that will lead you to success too, because the reality is, like my dad said, there's always somebody who's richer, faster, smarter, prettier, and you have to be confident in who you are and know that you're good enough in what you bring to the table, and then kind of work from that, right? Work from that as your baseline.
Well, and I love that, that idea of kind of practicing contentment, because I think one of the most useful litmus tests that we could create for money is, to what degree are we at peace with where we are in money in our life? And, success, certainly, achieving whatever your goals might be, and they don't have to be anything grand, but whatever they are, achieving that is part of it. But being at peace, and as you say, contentment, and creating a way of thinking about and handling money, that's actually, to me, well, it's at least of equal importance as getting to the end place.
That's right.
Because as you say, that's our life.
That's right. And they've done studies around it too. I mean, this is more related to the retirement part of the goal, right? But they've done studies around, who are the people that are the happiest in retirement. And it's not the people that have the most money. It's the people that have the best plan, right?
Well, the study that I've heard recently, which I think is fascinating, is they talk about kind of the importance of money, and they say that up to about $75,000.
Right. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
That money is important for helping you towards happiness. After that, it can actually hurt you along the way. But it's, once you get to 75, it can help, it can hurt along the way.
Yeah. You got to have enough money to be able to, feed your family, put clothes on your back and shelter, all those, the things. And so every dollar in search of that level is super important.
Yeah.
And then it starts to diminish over time and eventually can sort of work against you. Yeah, for sure.
So that's great. So you kind of, first part of the framework, and we're going to get to a lot of practical things, is kind of that decision to, and that framework of investing in yourself, and then that mental layer underneath it to say that we're also working to be content along the journey. So what's next?
Yeah. So, I mean, the next thing that I would say is pay yourself first.
Okay.
Right. And you can kind of think about it in a lot of different ways, but most of the time what people do is they make money and then they spend and they do life and they do, all their stuff, and whatever's left over is what's saved or what's invested. But if you're doing it properly, you kind of flip that on its head, right? You pay yourself first, which means that you get paid and you immediately put the dollars that are going to put you on the path to success to work.
Okay.
Right? So you get your money invested, you get your money saved, you get your mortgage paid, your obligations paid. And then really what you have left over is your spending account. People think about their savings account as their slush money, but in reality, your checking account, what you have in the bank should be your fun money. That should be your spending money, right?
Right.
So just trying to and I realized that it's mental gymnastics, right? It's the same
Sure.
thing,
Yeah.
but just said in a different way. But I do believe that these barriers, these practical barriers, these,
Yeah.
the setup is super important. So if you
Yeah.
can get people to sort of do the right thing first.
Well, exactly. And that's where it gets beyond mental gymnastics, because then if you orient your life, if you automate your life, which we'll talk about, in such a way that you are paid first, and by saying you're paid first, you're really talking about using your money first towards priorities.
Right.
And the priorities are those core expenses that, are non-negotiable, like your mortgage and your basic expenses. And then saying, okay, I have something left over after I've saved, after I've spent that initial money. And I would throw in just my own personal opinion that paying yourself first would include some practice of giving. Because I think that in order for money to have the right place in our life, we need to have some regular practice of giving. And so if somehow we can say, okay, that first, that paying yourself encompasses saving, and it encompasses giving, and it encompasses handling all of your core expenses. Now, that may not leave a lot left over, but there should be something left over if we're handling those things right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, you want your money to go to the things that mean the most to you.
Yes.
And unfortunately, most of the time, we have no idea where our money's even going, right? We're spending it, and I always pick on Starbucks. I like Starbucks. There's nothing wrong with Starbucks, but
except the prices.
Except the prices, but we spend it frivolously. You know what I mean? We don't really know where the dollars are going. And so if you practice the intention, if there's the discipline of putting the dollars in the places where they mean the most. And then what's really nice about it is that, we talk about the leftover being the spending account. It's such a great freedom knowing that every dollar, and it's like, oh man, we got money left over. Let's go on a date night. Let's go take a trip, or let's, go out to eat, or let's, really enjoy the leftover because I know I've taken care of our obligations.
And this is a personal hack that I like, that I've used along those lines, because it simplifies things tremendously. I mean, if we have a house, we have a mortgage. We know exactly what that amount is. We can probably predict our utility bills within, X dollars.
Right.
Savings, we make a decision about how much we want to save or give. And so what it comes down to is, just with really, really simple math, you can figure out kind of what that spending budget is. And particularly in today's world, which is functionally a cashless world, I learned years ago to say, all I have to truly budget in my life is my credit card.
Right.
Because all of my, extra spending is going on a credit card. So if I manage my credit card, then I can stay, quote, within budget. And so instead of thinking about budgeting as I have to take 50 different categories, I took one category. And since you can check your, your credit card amount online, it was like, okay, I got $1,000, I got 10,000, doesn't really matter what amount. I just am budgeting that one thing. And like you said, that just creates so much freedom, because you're not constantly worried about, well, I can't spend anything, or am I overspending?
Right.
You always know exactly where you stand. So,
well, and you're kind of leading into what I would say is maybe the next tenet for success, which is, automating success.
Right.
Right. So the fact that you've got all your bills paid, well, maybe you've got it set up to automatically do that for you, right?
Exactly.
The money goes in. I mean, so you have to invest the time to be able to figure all that stuff out first, and then you kind of build the structure to support the plan, right? And so if you can get your bills paid, your mortgage paid, your investments going, your saving, like all of that stuff automated for you. I read a book one time, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it talked about the power of the default, right?
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I related to if I have an option that's on the computer and it literally says default next to it, and I don't know any better, then I just go with the default, right? Because that's the default option. Well, we have the power to choose our own default option in our financial lives. And so trying to expend the energy up front to set the default mechanism as one that leads us towards success, right? And so you're expending this energy, and the power of the default is that in order to mess it up, you have to expend more energy and intentionally do that, right? And intentionally change it, intentionally mess up the plan.
Yeah.
Because you got it automatically, set for success.
Yeah. I just talked about that on a previous episode about technology, of setting up defaults for your technology, of saying, okay, I'm allowed to spend 1 hour on Instagram, and then it's going to automatically cut me off.
That's right.
It's going to cut off my internet access after 9 o'clock. Setting those defaults up, I called them governors, so that you had to physically go to a lot of effort to undo the thing that you had decided previously was important.
That's right. I really believe this. I'm going to mess it up when I say it, but it's something to the effect of, we don't tend to rise to our potential, but we do tend to fall to our systems. Right.
Yes.
And so, the structure is really the support of your life. And so, if we can build the structure to be one that leads us to success, then I think we got a lot better chance.
Yeah. So a couple of, again, just real practicals on this that I employ. One is I have in my bank account an automatic withdrawal from my normal spending bank account to a tithe account, a giving account every month, because I know I want to do that.
Right.
I know I want to do it every single month. So I automatically have it go over.
That's right.
And then it's in a different bank account that I do not consider my own. So you can do the same thing with a savings account or to an investment account.
That's right.
The other thing that I've really learned is, paying bills online, it doesn't take hardly any time to do it. And I have that covering so many of my bills that now I pay bills once a week. It takes me on average somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes to pay all of my bills for a week, because there are only a couple each week that come in that don't fall into those automatic categories. So you put an hour's time to set it up, and you save an hour's time every week for the rest of your life.
That's right.
It's great.
Well, the couple things I would throw in there just as maybe cautions, talking about, it's nice that it's automated, but it's also automated so you don't think about it a lot, right? And so a couple things that you might, just be wary of is, once you have something that's set up to pay your bills, you do need to follow back up and check on them, make sure that you're being charged the right amount and it's not, all that sort of good stuff. But from my side, from the investment side of things too, a lot of times you can set up a financial strategy, an investment strategy, and you're automatically saving money. But you may choose a dollar amount instead of a percentage amount. And there's this term, we call lifestyle creep, right? Which is the more money you make, the more money you spend, right? And that's just a reality of, we'll call it most people. And so one thing that you can do to really protect yourself against that, because again, what you'll do is if you make $50,000 and you put $5,000, into your 401k, well, $5,000, that's 10%. Now, that's a pretty that's a nice percentage going into your 401k.
Absolutely.
But if you start earning $100,000 and you're still saving the $5,000 that you initially put in there, right? Because you put a dollar figure instead of a percentage amount, then you can end up falling behind on your savings. So as you're doing these things, there's a couple little hacks that you can, just little seedlings to remember. try to choose a percentage of your earnings instead of
Yes.
a dollar amount. So that way, as your earnings, over time grows, so will your savings amount. And you won't be subjecting yourself to as much of that lifestyle creep. Because again,
Yeah.
if the money's not in there, you're not likely to spend it, right? I mean, that's the
Yes.
difference between you moving the money from one account to another. You probably have access to that same tithe account as you do
Sure.
the other one, but we mentally separate them. And so that mental gymnastics, even though that's all it is, actually has a meaningful impact.
Sure. It's very important. And I love that idea of kind of deciding the percentages that you want to govern your life over the long haul
Right.
is a great kind of practice for this. And, one of the things I try to make a practice of, I actually just had my annual physical today, which is always a fun procedure. But I like to also once a year do like an annual checkup on my finances.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, I do it more often than that. But once a year, if I step back and just go, are the right things happening with the things that I have investments in? Am I putting the right amount of money into the giving account because maybe it was a dollar amount and the percentages have changed for me up or down or whatever? Are my systems working right? Do that once a year. And again, it doesn't take long and it just kind of keeps you a little bit on the right track with it. And it would be a great thing to do with your spouse if you're married, to have that kind of conversation. It's, it's uncomfortable until you've just done it a few times.
Yeah.
So that's excellent. So any other ideas on the automating? Because I think that is so powerful.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it really is. It's probably the most important thing that you can do, because we get caught up with life. And so if you can just set up a plan that's going to, tend you towards success, then you have a lot higher probability of getting there.
Yeah. And it really, if you set some of those things up right, they can help you rest easier. So just, again, it's just a little kind of hack type of example, but, you have these bills that are the same amount. Those are really easy to automate. But then you have bills that are within a certain range. Let's say you have a utility bill that's $300, roughly every month, but it's not the same. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to automate. And you have these times maybe where you're gone for a week or two and bills can come in and all of a sudden they can be late. I set it up in my automatic payments to just be a close amount so that if by chance I happen to miss the bill when it comes in, they're still going to get paid enough to not cut off the power on me. It may not be exactly right, but I'm not going to get myself into trouble with that, which again just helps me so I can just breathe easier all the time, knowing nothing really drastic is going to happen.
Yeah.
So
I like that.
Yeah. So great ideas, hopefully really practical ideas that maybe if you're really good with money, you hadn't thought about some of these ideas.
Yeah.
So lots of takeaways on this, but I think maybe as we kind of start to wrap up, I'd like to offer people in all the various stages just a few, like, let's do this now. Let's think about this now. Here's one or two things, three things that I can take away right now from this episode, even if I don't come back to it or whatever. What rises to the top in your mind?
I think the first thing, I mean, and we didn't really talk about this, but I do think the first thing that I would want to start with is just recognizing that money's not the goal. Money money's a tool. Money's a tool to be able to help you reach other goals, right? I mean, the things that you really want to invest in are your faith, your relationships, your health, your future, stuff like that. And so just kind of getting yourself in that space of why am I doing this? What am I really trying to do so that, when you actually go to implement the plan, whatever the plan is, that you're coming at it from, the right space.
Yeah, it's the core of making money work for you rather than you working for money.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I love that.
But if we're talking about the practicalities, I try to simplify it, right? You have to invest in yourself, right? You have to put yourself on a career path that you can be able to save. You want to automate success, right? Set up systems, spend the time to set up systems to point you in the right direction. And then the last thing is probably, and we didn't, the last piece is probably recognizing that success happens over time.
Yeah.
It's not it's not an overnight sort of a thing. It happens over many years based on the disciplines that we've talked about. And so, try not to get too worried if you're not there today, just put one foot in front of the other.
Which the beauty of that is if this is so uncomfortable with you, you can still get started. So you could still say, you know what? I don't have any money to save. I'm going to start saving $10 a month, just as a matter of principle, $50 a month. I'm going to start doing it because I know that I have to start somewhere. And I would say the same thing, on the giving part.
Right.
So if you both take a step towards automating and a step towards starting, wow, that's incredible. And then the last one, going back to the earlier part, is talk about it.
Right. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that would just be unbelievable.
Because life, life changes and you have to be able to sort of flex, with things, and having a companion in that journey, to bounce somebody that you truly trust to be able to bounce these situations and, concerns off of. It's definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this is exactly what I hope for, in this episode. I think it applies wherever we are kind of in this money journey. And I think it helps us move to having money work for us. That is, enter into that tool space as opposed to us always fighting a money journey. So we haven't really talked about, equity concepts. I do want to say from a really honest perspective that there are a couple of things that I like about what you have created, you and others have created equity concepts. One is that it's about something that's more than just helping people with investments. And there are a lot of great investment firms out there, so nothing wrong with that. But you do help people in a wide range of, financial position to plan their finances, plan their journey with the money. And you guys do it in an incredible way. So it helps not just as a place to park your money and hopefully grow your money, but to plan what is important, as you say, and to get on a right path. I think that's incredibly helpful for so many people. And you guys do a phenomenal job at that. And you also have a, incredible range, with regards to investments. So I get to sing your praises as opposed to your saying that. So I know you would welcome people reaching out that would like to talk more about this or with someone, on the team about this, because as I say, we all need a little bit of help along the way and we learn with it. And, I'm in the humble place right now of learning from both of my sons in the finance world when I thought I was like the big wig with it. And so, it's really, really cool to see that. And you've been a big help along that ways. So, thanks everybody. Love to hear your thoughts. I think this is an incredible episode to share. This might be a way of opening up discussion with your spouse or with your kids at all sorts of ages, with friends that you know might be battling this to some degree. So it's a great episode to share. It's been a little bit along different lines, but I think it's really worth it because, how we handle this thing called money is huge to where we go in our lives. So hope you've enjoyed the episode. Canon, thanks a ton.
Thanks for having me.
With it, and look forward to seeing you next week.